Hello art friends, good to see you again. I'm going to be doing a small series of mini collages with black as the primary color. So you'll see I've pulled out my plastic containers with my stash of all these painted papers. In this video, I actually recorded 3 of my different sessions for this, which makes this a little bit longer video. I hope you enjoy. All right, so the first one, here's the papers I pulled for that. And you'll see most of them are black. I do have a couple of colored striped painted papers that I pulled as well that has some orange on it. I'm also using my regular matte medium. I had these old book pages that I thought would be interesting to use. I don't normally use stuff that's been printed or published just for copyright issues and that sort of things. Most of the time I'm generally just using my painted papers or stuff that I've created or something that's doesn't have any copyright issues. But I had these old book pages that, you know, obviously are black and white, and I thought they would work well, so I thought I would start with those. Now I'm just trying to add some other textures and patterns. Trying to keep this primarily black as the main focal color. I didn't really like the solid piece of paper I had there. I think I may bring it back in later, but it was just so dark. Even though these are black, they're not like black. They're more of a dark sort of gray black. So I'm just playing around trying to find a good layout to get started as my base layer. Now normally I work in a square format. Rather than creating squares this time, I thought I would try doing some that are, I think these are maybe 5 by 7 or 4 by 6. So they're a little bit different aspect ratio than my normal square format. So that offered a little bit more of a challenge because the spacing is a little bit different. So I'm just cutting out some dots. I have a lot of stripes and line texture, so I thought the round element might be interesting. I wanted to add some transparent elements over some of the writing and some of the images that were on the book papers, just so they weren't quite so distinct. So here I'm trying to find something that may obscure that a little bit. And I also have quite a mix of papers here that are opaque and transparent, which is also a little bit different. Normally I'm using a lot of transparent papers. So when you use opaque papers, it becomes a little more difficult because the colors and the patterns pretty much stay there unless you completely cover them up. So I'm just getting these all glued down. And then I'll go back and add some of the smaller pieces once I kind of get the main pieces I had down, just to cover up some harsh corners or edges that meet that might not look quite right. Now with some of these thicker pages or papers that I'm putting down, like the book papers, you might actually need to use gel medium instead of the more liquidy medium. And I just fast forwarded there and I just glued down that. So now it's just a question of, I don't know, filling in some of those gaps and sort of connecting some of the elements together with elements and papers that are more transparent. I normally work on 2 at a time because it gives me a chance to kind of visual shift between things. If I'm getting stuck on one, I can go work on the other. Or if, you know, I want to let something dry, it gives me a chance to let that dry while I work on something else. So I'm still looking for some more transparent type papers that I can use to maybe fill in some of those larger white areas, just to sort of finish that rectangular shape. So now I'm bringing back that really, really dark black. This was like, it was almost like a construction paper. I think it was a some sort of paper that had a little bit of fabric in it, because you can see on that one that's torn, it looks like it's got quite a bit of edge that's showing, that's very fuzzy. Trying to decide if this piece will fit in somewhere. I generally try to use them as I sort of tear them, but sometimes you have to rip them and do some different things. So here you'll see I had glued that little piece down, and I have these circles still that I'm trying to fit in, just because I think it needs a round element. Now that I have that paper that I put with the small circles on it, I think having that round element kind of pulls it together a little bit. So I'm going to paste those down. And then these are really probably fairly close to finished at this point in time. Just checking some of the edges. I need to put some round ones on the other one just to be consistent. Now these are probably a little bit busy for me normally, but I do like that I moved outside of the square format and used a few more opaque type papers. It gives me some ideas from other things that I can do, especially with the little text. It creates a very linear element with all the, you know, the typeset text. All right, so now I'm just going to finish this one by adding these little circles and the half circle. I kind of like the half circle hanging off the side. Just gives it a little bit more interest. So I'm going to glue those down, and then these will be finished. All right, so the second set I did, I went back to my square format. Again, I pulled a whole bunch of papers. This one also has some yellow in it. I really like this marble paper with the gold sort of metallic-y striations that were going through it. So I thought I would start with that as my main piece. But because this had gold, I found this piece that I had done on my gel plate with a stencil that had some yellow in it that looked kind of gold colored. So I thought that might work well with this one. And I'm just kind of randomly grabbing stuff from my stack of paper over there to see if there's anything that sort of works. These are India ink marks on probably deli paper. I like India ink because it makes really, really dark, solid black marks. Sometimes acrylic paint doesn't quite give you as dark a marks They're not quite as opaque. So I'd like to use India ink a lot of times to make my black papers with black marks and black shapes on them. Just trying to find some smaller shapes or something that will fit along the edges to kind of contain the shape of that square a little bit. And these book pages were great because they already had a straight edge and they have this little sort of linear pattern with the text that sort of adds that visual there, which is nice. I wanted to cover up that straight edge on that black piece because I don't really like a lot of straight edges when I do these little collages. I like stuff that's sort of more organic, which is why I generally tear my papers unless I'm trying to, cut something out as a specific shape. All right, so I think it looks like I'm happy with this. So I'm going to glue down those base pieces just to get a start. And you'll see that I'm covering up the hard edges. I do like my torn edge look to my collages. I also had this piece of paper that had this handwritten script on it that I think is an interesting mark here because it's much less dense as far as a pattern. A lot of the pieces I have on there are pretty, there's a lot of pattern to them and they're fairly dense as far as being filled. And this had a lot of sort of white space and open air, but I think it completed the bottom of that collage so that visually now it creates a square, but it wasn't a real big solid black area. And I do the same thing on the other one. I run it up the side here. Again, just to complete that square from a visual standpoint. And you'll see that now they look like squares, even though I've got a big white open space at the top on the one on the left and a little gap on the bottom as well, just because of the way it kind of frames that in. Now I'm filling in some little gaps that I don't like. There was that sort of white gap there, and there's that triangular gap on the one on the left. Okay, so here again, I'm just working to soften up some of those harsher edges. And so I kind of did a transition gray piece there. And then I have a little piece that I put in that white triangular space up top, again, to do the same thing, just to kind of connect those pieces. And I'm done. All right, so I have the same stack of papers that I used for the previous one. That one had a little bit of yellow in it. So I think because these are all black and white, that's the motif. I maybe want to add a little color to this one. So I have these gray fabric swatches. And this is actually from a roll of toilet paper. But I liked the gray pattern on here, and maybe I'll bring in some of this turquoisey color. It's tissue paper, so it's going to have some transparency to it as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start with that piece. So instead of starting with black on this one, I actually started with the color, which was that sort of deep turquoise color. And now I'm just assembling other pieces that have some gray and black in it. Again, there's that really dark black. And you'll see I use those in small pieces. I think having a large piece would be overwhelming. And I was trying to get some different type of marks in there. This is really just a very, very quick fast forward through me playing with those pieces. And that really takes the longest time, I think, is getting that first layer put down in a composition that is going to work to support the rest of the collage. So here I've slowed it down just a little bit after 15 minutes of kind of fussing around with it. I also have these fabric pieces now that I want to try to find a home for as well. And it's really hard when stuff isn't glued down. It kind of pushes around, so you're always kind of adjusting it. But I don't really like to glue stuff down until I'm really, really sure about that first layer. Since I don't come back and paint over these, which you could do to cover up some of those layers if you don't like where things are, I try to really work out the composition before I put too much stuff down. So it looks like I'm ready to do this one on the right. So I'm putting on my matte medium. I'm going to get that layer glued down. And it's kind of important that you remember which order you had them in so that they overlap the way you want them. Sometimes I forget and I have to kind of pull them back up and try to work with them with glue all over them, which isn't fun. Now the fabric was a bit of a challenge because it's thick, but it's also not a really tight weave. So gluing it down was almost impossible. I ended up having to get out my PVA glue and glue it down. It's a much thicker glue with a little bit, I think it's got probably a better binding for things that are not paper, even though it's made for book binding and stuff like that. It seems to work much better on thicker things and fabrics and stuff like that. So now I'm getting the left one glued down. And I think I forgot the layout that I had. So I'm trying to make adjustments. And you'll see I had to pull that back up, and now it's all full of glue. So it's harder to get sort of placed and not get all wrinkled and torn, especially if you're using tissue paper or something that's fairly fragile. All right, so I got that all glued down. Now the fabric piece, I'm going to add my PVA glue. And they probably could have been done there, I think. I like the compositions. There's some white space that gives you some places to rest your eyes. The pieces all seem connected. And I'm still fighting to get that fabric to stay glued down. Once the glue dries, it's fine, but it was just getting it to stay down while I was working on it that it was kind of a problem. I wanted to add a little bit more of that dark black. So I decided to glue some little pieces on. Again, I wanted to get some smaller pieces. Most of the pieces that were on there are about the same size with the exception of the fabric. And I really liked the writing that I used in the last one. So I thought I would try the same thing where I use it just along an edge to maybe complete that square visually. And I think the last thing to do here was just add a few smaller detail pieces. I thought that one needed a little bit more black on it. Gluing down all the loose edges of the fabric because they're also really hard to get to stick down. And then I had this other piece on this really, really white paper. And I was trying to see if I could get that to work somewhere. Another piece that had some turquoise on it that I thought might be nice because it was a little bit brighter turquoise. And I thought that big circular mark that was there was maybe a little bit too overwhelming. So it looked good there, and then they're finished. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy collaging.